Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It's 11:25, December 1st. Hard to believe it is the start to December, Christmas time. It's officially Christmas season, Christmas time, Christmas cheer to be spread. So I hope everyone's doing good. I did a couple of videos last night, only because I had some bad insomnia. My sinuses, and I got this weird little cough last night. I couldn't sleep. Feeling a little bit better. I didn't sleep so well last night, um, but not too bad. Anyway, I've been revisiting, and I had talked about this movie before, but this is such a great movie. It gets better and better every time I see it, and that is Love Brides of the Blood Mummy. This movie is just so much damn fun. Um, 1973. It's a Spanish, low down and dirty, sleazy exploitation movie. And so I've talked a lot about this before. I should back up a minute, but last night I did an impromptu video on this fabulous movie. I have another, I had done a previous review of this film, but um, I watched a different version of the film last night. I didn't really realize, or I should say, I have I have known about it, but I just never really watched it. On this disc, there's two versions of the film. There's the extended cut, and then there's a version that's called the horror cut. So every time I've watched this movie, probably about, I don't know, it's probably about 5 or 6 times now. I think it's great. I enjoy it more and more every time. So I watched the horror cut version of it last night, and I felt inclined to do a show because sometimes when there's like a director's cut, compared to say the theatrical release of a particular film, um, those movies or those versions can be very different from each other, And I most of the time for myself, especially, that's one of the bonus things about buying movies on Blu-ray is that often there's always like a director's cut because when by the time a movie gets to the theatrical, the actual like release date, and it's actually put into theaters, there's obviously many changes that happen. There's a lot of cuts. There's a lot of editing. One of the biggest things that ends up happening is the trying to cut enough so it's like at a reasonable time, because a lot of the times for movies, they might uncut or to a degree unedited. They can run sometimes 3 to 4 hours. So there's the editing process for a film is so important. It really is, because it's really about the pacing. It sets the pace. It's all about how you can transition from scene to scene, and it goes into like whether or not a story, with its characters, the filmmakers decide to, kind of really explore the some of the characters, like maybe their backstory or where they're from or how they arrived at this particular place or juncture. And some films are, it totally depends on the narrative. I mean, sometimes films are, really great when you're introduced to characters and they're, you get a little glimmer of the backstory, or and you have just enough to kind of care about them. And in some ways, there's other films out there that will take, you know um, a more, I guess, literary approach, but they'll go more in depth about how that character or characters how they arrive to that place, and it all depends on the on the the structure of the film. I think a classic example of that is like Ridley Scott's Alien. We don't know all that much about the crew on the Nostromo, but we know just enough. We don't need to like know this intense kind of backstory. We have just enough information, and it works. And then you have certain films like I don't know, like for instance, I think even though it's a very different movie, but it's still a horror film. But I think a film like The Substance with Demi Moore, where it does go in detail of that character's place and how they kind of arrive to where they are, and for that story, it works. And granted, it's a very different kind of a film, but so it's all in the context. But sometimes that's needed, sometimes it's not. So the editing process, in a lot of ways, can kind of make or break a movie. And being that I own a lot of movies, and I watch a lot of films. Most of the time when I buy a Blu-ray, there's always, I mean, pretty much 95% of the time, every movie that I've gotten over the last bunch of time or last few years always has usually two or three versions of that particular of that particular film. And I typically always go for, like, if there's a, they'll have the theatrical version and then they'll have, like, say, the director's cut. I typically always go for the director's cut. Because I often find that that's like more, or really, at the end of the day, kind of really encapsulates what the director was trying to really convey with the film. Everything I always find too with director's cuts for films that it's very rare, very very rare when I have seen a movie that if I have the option to see the director's cut as opposed to the theatrical version, I can't really think of any times of where I prefer the actual theatrical cut. Because yeah, that can be great and wonderful, but to me, it's more. There's a little bit more detail, but things are a little bit more fleshed out, and some things really make a big difference. There's so many examples of that. Like it's crazy. And I always go to that version. But this is with this film, Love Brides of the Blood Mummy. It's a little bit different because there is an extended cut, which is technically director's cut. It's safe to say that's pretty much the director's cut. That's kind of what at the end of the day, it was trimmed trimmed down because of maybe the runtime. This movie itself is actually very short. The Most of these exploitation movies are on the shorter side. I mean, you have most of the films that I own, in particular Mondo Macabre. A lot of the films are like 100 and or like an hour and a half. Basically, there's not a whole lot of compared to most movies today. A lot of movies are pretty lengthy. And I don't often always get on that bandwagon because a lot of people do complain about it. But a lot of movies are typically very long. Like I just went with a buddy to go see the third Knives Out film, which was really really awesome. I just uploaded a video review of it, and really great. But it's a pretty long movie. It's a 2.5 hour movie. I mean, that's a good chunk of time. So I understand that, but the thing with a lot of these sleazy exploitation movies is they are typically really short, hour and a half. So there's a few movies that I have that are maybe closer to 2 hours, but generally their lengths are not very long. But with this film, I again, like, last year or a couple of years ago, I did a review for this film, and I don't. And every time I've watched this film, I've only watched the um, extended cut. But the other night, or was it last night? Yeah, last night I watched the this other cut or this other version of the film that's called the horror cut, which is kind of a weird thing. But I noticed quite a bit of a difference. Actually, I thought, I could be off by a few minutes, but I think it was safe to say that there might have been about 15 minutes or so added to this film, and I actually prefer the horror cut version of this film. It's really great. It gets a little bit more into the kind of psychedelia element of this movie. This movie is it's a very it's such a weird, trippy ass movie. And so last night, I haven't uploaded them yet, but I did a kind of a two-part series on this film, but more so on the horror cut, a different version of the film. And from what I remember of compared to watching this cut compared to the extended cut, it's quite a bit different. And I think I prefer the horror cut over the extended cut. It's a little bit more, just more involved. And again, I think this film has a very psychedelic vibe. So it seems to have that even more. But one of the things today's show really is about one of the things that I love the most about this movie, and again, it's one of my biggest loves in general of why I love film. I mean, especially when it comes to my band Quantum, like it's kind of one of the biggest influences is the film score, the film track for films, and this movie has such an amazing film score. Like I really, really, really love it. I think it's fantastic. I have been like totally enjoying it. It's super fun. It's really trippy as all hell in a lot of ways. Um, it's very psychedelic. The composer is Max Gonzala, who is the composer for Love Brides of the Blood Mummy. This gem right here. And the music, the film score for this film it's got to be one of my favorites. So I wanted to do a show on just the film score. It's an incredible mix of music too. It's like there's strings in the fold. There's strings, but there's also like rock elements of rock music, and it's very psychedelic. That's the thing that I love the most about it. It's got this orchestral feel, but yet it has this kind of rock. It's very obviously super 70s, but it's some of the coolest music, and it's super uh, psychedelic. It's very ethereal. It's kind of melancholia. It's very melancholy, and it's kind of spooky, but it's very psychedelic. It's got one of the coolest. The soundtrack is just great. I would love to buy the soundtrack for this film because it's some of my favorite music in a movie. It really is, just in general, not just for low down and dirty sleazy exploitation movies, but Max Gonzalez's soundtrack is just phenomenal. I love the elements of where he uses strings. There's like a string arrangement, but it's like combined with like psychedelic rock, and it's super trippy. It's got this very trippy, kind of deep vibe to it. It's really, really good. It's got this very haunting quality. It's has this, well, again, it's very melancholy. It's kind of scary. It's kind of sad. There's like this feeling of loneliness. And again, I have always talked about this a lot with music. Is I really love when film, well, music in general, but especially with film, because music is such an integral part to a film. I mean, this is a primetime example. I think this film score is so great that it acts as if it's a a character in this film. It really just enhances. It creates the whole mood, the whole vibe. Because one of the things that I said about this movie last night when I did this, when I started to do these videos on this horror cut version of this movie was the cinematography is just out of this world. It's pretty spectacular. It's a gorgeous film, and I think you know, it's one of those movies, and that's something that's been happening to me over this past year, especially because I revisit a lot of these movies, and most of these movies, especially with Mondo Macabre, I've bought all of these movies that I have never seen before, and I have just like literally struck gold each time. Too often people who don't like these kinds of films like reserve it as like, or they look at it as just pure trash. There's nothing to be taken. There's nothing I don't know artistic about it or of like actual value compared to say a big blockbuster action or drama, if you will, or like a foreign film. But these movies all are technically they are all foreign films, and I think yeah, these movies are super sleazy, super trashy, super weird, super strange. But there's a certain quality to these movies that I could see them totally appealing to people who are not, who would never give these movies any kind of legitimacy in any way, shape, or form, and actually watch a movie like this and be like, you know what, this movie has some kind of deeper qualities to it that I didn't think were was there before, and I had that happen with a friend a few years ago, and we had watched one of these movies, and she had never really seen too many of these exploitation movies, and she, was really surprised by that element. Like, wow, like this movie, it's not just pure trashy, salacious, sexuality and violence and gore. It's actually, wow, there's actually some depth to this film. There's actually some beauty to it. And that's one thing that's happened to me more and more is because I've always loved foreign films, and these are technically all foreign films. But there's a beauty to this movie, as as cheesy and as awful as it is. There's this juxtaposition, and the soundtrack is just extraordinary. Again, it's so rich. It creates such a vibe and such a mood. Yeah, it's extraordinary. I would love to buy it on CD or something. I'm sure it's online somewhere. One of the things that was super cool when I started buying a lot of these exploitation movies was that a lot of these movies came with soundtrack. The soundtracks for a lot of these films. I don't really see that anymore, though. I haven't seen it about 3 years ago or so when I was getting into buying a lot of these movies. A lot of them came with soundtracks. I got a few really great Lucio Fulci movies, and they all came with soundtracks, and a handful of other movies, and I have like the soundtracks to a bunch of really great movies on CD. But in the last couple of years, I haven't come across that in a long time. It's probably because of the you know people mostly streaming music now, and it's probably an extra expense for these companies to put together. But yeah, this would be one of those soundtracks. I absolutely love this music, so I'm gonna see if I can get it somewhere online. But fantastic film score, what for a totally trippy ass movie. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.